If you've been a viewer of this channel, you know I'm very interested in not only sonic music production, but music production in general. Pretty much everything in my studio space is related to sonic in some way, even devices that aren't in this picture yet. Recognizing this, you'd see why it's nerve-wracking to say the least to see so many false ideas spreading like wildfire throughout the sonic fanbase with little to no recourse. This is pretty much my version of the Kimba controversy.
This is exactly why people should avoid having strong opinions on subjects that they haven't done their own research on.
If there's one thing the sonic fanbase loves doing, it's being confidently wrong about aspects of development they've never been involved in. So today, I'll be trying to fix that issue by fixing the often incorrect assertions about sonic music from people who have never touched an instrument before. Here's a light one to get started. The Sonic 1 and 2 demo tape translation to the Genesis hardware was directly overseen by Masato Nakamura. They were not transcribed, and any changes were intentionally made by the arrangers. I don't blame anyone for not knowing this one, as it was only discovered a little bit ago, as I was going through Naofumi Hataya's Twitter. Hataya mentions directly that Nakamura would drop by the Sega offices every so often to verify the sound programming process, along with giving Sega music data from his SY77. The SY77 was one of the synths he used to make the demo tapes. This gets rid of the theories that the Sonic 2 demo tapes are slower so that the programmers could listen to them better, as they were overseen by Nakamura himself, meaning that the changes to the tempo of the songs were made by the sound programmers and Nakamura together, and that those were the intentional speeds of the tracks. Next is an easy one. Whenever classic Sonic music is brought up in relation to series composer Jun Senoue, the quote-unquote fact that he only credited demos for his contributions to Sonic 3 and 3D Blast is mentioned. This is provably false and would require less than 10 seconds of research to check. If you look up Sonic 3D Blast on the first page of Google, you'll see its Sonic Retro page. When scrolling down, under the section Sound Test, all soundtrack credits for both composing and sound programming are listed. Note that arrange on this list means sound programming. Notice that not only does Senoue program his own tracks, but he also programs tracks for others, such as the credits theme by Seiro Okamoto. Furthermore, if you look at the credits for the game, notice that there are no credits for sound programming as in Sonic 1 and 2. Out of all these misconceptions, this is possibly the dumbest, as all you have to do to disprove it is open Google. We should also get rid of the most common one, which is that Sonic music uses Soundfonts in any way. Sonic music does not use Soundfonts. The Sega Genesis does not use Soundfonts. The Super Nintendo does not use Soundfonts. No consoles use Soundfonts as their method of producing sound. Consoles that do not have the ability to play streamed audio use sound chips with specifications tailored to the console. The Sega Genesis in particular uses the Yamaha YM2612, an FM chip that can play 6 FM channels or 5 FM channels and 1 PCM channel, and 4 PSG channels. In addition, we should actually define what a soundfont is to reduce further confusion. A soundfont is a file format created by EMU Systems for use with their samplers and sound cards like the Sound Blaster AWE32. A second version, the incarnation that can be used in music today, was created in 1996. A soundfont can contain waveform data and patch data for playback in a soundfont player, and only in soundfont players, not consoles. Not the Wii, the NES, the PlayStation, or any other console at any point in time. This myth is actually easy to find the source of. Undertale is a popular game with music written by its creator, Toby Fox. It iconically uses soundfonts created from sound sets from popular games. This led to the word soundfont entering collective consciousness as the word for a game's general sound. That leads to an understandable question. Since the word soundfont is incorrectly used, what's the actual word? Well, there are several good replacements. Sound set, sound bank, patch bank, sample set, instrumentation, music style, sound direction, etc. There are a lot of good ways to talk about the general sound of a video game without using the word soundfont. In addition, consoles do not use MIDI. They use their own format for storing song sequences that often look like MIDI or can be converted to and from a MIDI file, but they are not MIDIs. Only a small handful of games per console use the MIDI format directly, and they're often created by small studios with a limited access to the development kits of the console that they're developing for. Sega is not one of those companies. This directly leads to our next misconception, which is that Sonic Forces, or Sonic 4, use a Genesis sound font. The majority of the reason this is an uninformed conclusion was explained in the last section, but there's a bit more context here. Since Sonic Forces and Sonic 4 are streamed games, meaning they use files that contain the entirety of a song instead of a sequence of notes, it could be theoretically possible that they could use sound fonts. However, this would only be true if the composers themselves use sound fonts in their music. None of the Sega Sound Team composers use sound fonts, not even freelancers like T. Lopes and Hunter Bridges. In terms of specifics, Sonic 4 Episode 1 uses the Korg Triton as its instrument source, and Episode 2 uses Vacuum and Expand 2 by Air Music Technology, two built-in software instruments from Avid's Pro Tools, which is Jun Senoue's choice of music production program. It does not use FM patches in any way, unlike the next topic we're going to talk about. As mentioned in the last point, Sonic 4 and Sonic Forces do not use sound fonts. We know what Sonic 4 uses, so what does Sonic Forces use? Sonic Forces, to people's surprise, uses a real YM2612 from a real Sega Genesis, recorded from a real console. This is directly mentioned by Tomoya Otani in an interview, where he talks about sounding directly from the board of the Genesis. The reason why Sonic Forces music sounds like it does is because of the patch choice, not the source. Forces does not use FM patches from the Sonic series. It uses other patches from Naofumi Hataya's previous Genesis compositions, as well as custom patches created by Otani and Hataya specifically for Forces. This is why the game doesn't sound like typical classic Sonic music despite using the same hardware. Also, take note that I said Naofumi Hataya as well, not just Tomoya Otani. Hataya, one of the composers of Sonic CD, wrote some of the Forces classic music, notably Ghost Town. Continuing with the train of debunking myths about classic Sonic music, none of the Sonic Origins replacement songs, except for the new Supersonic music in Sonic 3, are recreations created by Jun Senoue. It's understandable why people believe this one though, since this was falsely mentioned by Sonic's social media manager Katie. In reality, the Sonic Origins remakes come from an even earlier beta of Sonic 3 than the November 1993 build. An excellent write-up of this by someone much smarter than me regarding assembly programming, MD Travis, is linked in the description of the video, and goes into a fascinating amount of detail that pretty much proves this theory. Related to Sonic 3 is a minor correction about its vocal samples. None of them except for the ones in Carnival Night are sampled from Michael Jackson's voice. They come from Norman Cook, Skip to My Loops, a sample CD used heavily in Sonic music, but first used in Sonic 3.
Woo! Come on! Go!
For that matter, Hang Castle, Reversed, doesn't use Michael Jackson samples either. On the topic of chiptune samples, Sonic CD does not use past music because of size limitations, or at least that's not the only reason. In the interview for the Sonic CD 20th anniversary album, past music was created because he and Masafumi Ogata wanted the music to sound prehistoric and old, presumably to fit with the time travel theme of the game. The next two directly tie into each other, and that is explaining what Sonic Adventure music experience is as a band and as an album set. Same as Jun Senoue's band for making Sonic Adventure-like music and remixes of SA1 and SA2. Crush 40 is only the collaboration of Jun Senoue and vocalist Johnny Gioeli. Note that this does not include bassist Takeshi Tanida, as while he does play for a lot of their tours and music, sometimes the bassist is changed out, and it's still classified as a Crush 40 show regardless. This brings me to my main point. It was reported by leaker of questionable credibility, Zippo, that the same albums were created for remakes of Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, which were cancelled in 2015. This one is so incorrect, I'm not sure how people not only believed it immediately, but never stopped to consider the details of how much sense this doesn't make. Firstly, a lot of these songs have extended or new intros, specifically made for a live performance. These parts of the songs would make no sense in the context of a remake, especially songs like Metal Harbor and Skyrail, which were specifically constructed to line up to the level design of the stage.
So who's next?
The album versions of these were recorded in a studio environment, So if they were for a remake, there's no reason for these intros to be there, except in preparation to perform live. Some of these songs are also massively extended, specifically for live performance, with a key example being, again, Metal Harbor, whose final chorus starts at 2:54 and lasts until the end of the song, which is more than half the length of the stage in the final game. Another obvious counter to this false theory is that these songs are nearly unfinished in their production. The drums are mixed in a way that they're almost completely separate from the original song. And guitars are a mix of newly recorded and reused stems, presumably to save time or keep the original tone of the song for when they're performed live. The reused stems are also much quieter to emphasize the instruments that will be played on stage. Some songs only have one track of rhythm guitar as opposed to the original's double tracking, which is essential to the sound of SA2, as Senoue often plays different parts on the left and right sides. Some parts of the songs are just straight up missing, as in This Way Out, where the final note of the guitar line is missing and the synth lead backing is too quiet to hear the last note clearly. A final nail in the coffin to this idea is that most of these songs wouldn't be able to receive remixes, because not only are the composers missing some of their original hardware that they used to make them, but some composers have left Sega entirely. Fumi Kumatani, the composer of most of Rouge's tracks, as well as the co-composer of Shadow songs, no longer works at Sega. Tomoyo Otani sold the hardware he used in his songs at least 15 years ago. You can physically hear the effects of this at the end of Pyramid Cave, when Senoue loops one of the organ chords in the stem, because he would have to get his Korg Trinity out of storage to use that sound again. Here's a comparison between the end of the song and what the patch playing the same chord sounds like on a real Trinity. These final issues are a bit more related to personal opinion, so I placed them at the end, so the purely fact-based misconceptions are understood first. Now we have to talk about the fanbase's reaction to more recent music in the series. Sonic Forces, composed mostly by Tomoyo Otani, took the series' music in a new, more modern direction. This means he includes genres of EDM, like psytrance, dubstep, and big room for some of the Avatar tracks, as well as a J-rock influence from modern Sonic's tracks. This was taken a step further, where a larger array of genres were included in Sonic Frontier's cyberspace stages, including techno, trance, futurecore, electro, jump up, and others. Whether you like these songs is none of my concern, but saying that they're bad is just categorically incorrect, unless you can name elements of the production that, within the genre, are not done well. However, typically that requires actual knowledge of production techniques and media literacy. Disliking something and that something being bad are not synonyms. You can like things that are good and dislike things that are bad, but that does not override their actual level of quality. Within the field of modern EDM, these tracks are adored. So if you were to claim these songs are actually bad, you'd have to somehow prove that most EDM genres are inherently not good, and not that you just don't like them. Sonic fans have a hard time understanding this in particular, because the Dunning-Kruger effect pervades this fanbase so heavily that research is looked down upon. This fanbase as a whole thrives off of just spouting the first thing that comes to your head instinctively with no further thought. This brings me to my main point, where we can talk about Sonic Force's implementation of supersaws. This is solely my personal opinion here. It's fine to not like certain instruments and their heavy usage, but this argument could easily be applied to Sonic Adventure 2 and its use of not only electric guitar, with the exact same tone for every song. Note that this is not a criticism for me. I absolutely love Adventure 2's soundtrack. I have the hardware amp sim that Senoue used for his tone. I have the rack version of the main synth that he used for the soundtrack. I have the drum machine he used for Eggman's and Tails' songs. I have another one of the keyboards he used. But the argument that repetitive sounds equals bad is so one-sided and clearly aimed at the sensibilities of Sonic fans and their favorite genres, and not at actual criticism. American punk rock music that sounds similar is fine, but not J-rock apparently. One final thing that I like to note is that Sonic fans, on average, can identify genres to save their life. Any critique of Force's soundtrack will most likely get a response that it's just techno or dubstep, immediately signifying that their media literacy skills are in the garbage, and expanding their musical horizons is not something on the menu. Transplant this thought process onto mainstream music, and Sonic fans are just the video game version of "I was born in the wrong generation, music sucks these days." Even more confusing is they can't even identify the genre that they like when it's present. I've seen many comments wishing that Otani would return to making liquid drum and bass for the Sonic series, even though Forces has tracks that are unarguably liquid DMB. Now that we're done with that, I'd like to see Sonic music discussion improve from here. There's so much blatantly wrong information floating around that poisons the well of just having a conversation about this series' music that I felt like this video was necessary. Other composers I've seen or am friends with have also expressed this idea. This isn't to increase my view count, but to genuinely improve the landscape of Sonic music criticism and media literacy within the fanbase.